Welcome to Olympian Method, the show where we ask the deep questions in philosophy. Please like the video, subscribe, and put your comments down below. We'd love to hear from you. So, Sean, I want to open up with a very, very lighthearted question. What's the meaning of life?
I can do you one better.
Oh, please.
What is life?
Whoa. All right, how should we approach this? What do we unpack first?
Well, in the literal sense, a study of life is biology. So I guess that could be a fair place to start.
Okay, kind of up your alley. So I'd appreciate any guidance from you on what life is.
Well, according to that, I guess, system of study or belief or communication, rather, life is defined as anything that responds to changes in the environment, can reproduce. And there's a third one that's skipping me right now. So this is why it took me 6 years to graduate college.
Okay, well, let's just start with those first pieces you were talking about.
Right.
Sorry, what was the first one? I remember the second one was reproduce.
First one is an ability to respond to changes in the environment.
To change. Okay. So what kind of changes are we talking about here? Because I mean, one way I think of life is that you're sort of in a process with nature where you're sort of consuming resources in order to continue to exist. And sometimes you're also sort of participating the other way where you're like adding things, or I guess that would be adding things to the environment where, like, you know, you're expelling like carbon dioxide and things like that. So you're participating in that ecosystem in a way. It's like that economy with the rest of the universe. You know what I mean?
Economy with the rest of the universe. That's a good way of putting it, actually.
Okay.
As economy as being like an exchange of energy and resources with the environment.
Okay.
You're exerting your will on the environment, and whatever is in the environment is exerting its will upon you, which can be other individual. It can be weather patterns. It can be other organisms. Like I think in terms of simplistic terms of like responding to changes in stimulus, like for example, like getting hungry, having a lack of energy and therefore seeking more, or being exposed to too much energy, like too much heat. Heat is a form of energy, and then seeking to adjust to that.
Well, so speaking of heat, I think we've talked about this before. Do you think, based on what we've talked so far, that you could think of fire as being alive? Because it's responding to its environment, it's consuming resources, it's also like contributing to, you know, it's providing, or it's changing that environment in certain ways. Like, based on this basic understanding of life, it seems like fire might be alive, or are we off track here?
I think that's actually it's an interesting point. We've brought it up off camera with a couple of our friends before, and it is an interesting thing. And I think I had said that I actually think that fire is alive, in that when you think about it, it consumes oxygen, it consumes resources, it does seek to stay alive in its some kind of way.
Do you think that means that fire has sort of like a will in some sense of the word?
It does. And I feel like what's interesting about fire, I mean, obviously fire can happen through like lightning strikes and everything like that. But I think when humans figured out how to create fire for ourselves, that was a very big turning point in our evolution and helped us expand our ability to live even further. So fire and cook food, etc., provide warmth. So fire was intrinsic to our survival, and most of what we need to survive is other living things. Like you said, we need to consume energy and other living things in order to live. But
we're also I mean, I guess we're kind of at the top of the food chain, but for other organisms, they become necessary in order for other parts of the ecosystem to survive. Like, they become the resources that others are living off of, right?
Right. When you think of fire happens usually when you're burning wood, coal, something that used to be alive. You cannot really burn something that wasn't living at some point. Even fossil fuels, they're called fossil fuels for a reason.
Right.
You know, petroleum-based energies that are left over from 65 million years ago. So life, heat, ability to have heat is life. So, I mean, I'm glad you brought up the energy pyramid, though, because if you trace the energy pyramid all the way back, you get to the sun.
Yeah.
Which is just a ball of fire in the sky. But that ball of fire has been revered throughout almost all cultures as being the source of all life.
But so, would you say the sun itself is alive too?
I mean, why not?
It sounds kind of weird to someone who doesn't have such an expansive view of life, I guess. And maybe there are some out there who feel the same way.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm just kind of curious because there was, okay, like for example, you mentioned the ability to like reproduce. Would you say the sun reproduces though necessarily?
I'm not sure. See, that's where the concept of what's living kind of breaks down a little bit. Like what does sun reproducing look like? I mean, you got to think about it in terms of the life cycle of whatever it is you're talking about.
Right.
So like humans, for example, have a life cycle of about, I don't know, 60 to 100 years. We'll just put everything in that frame on average. Certain creatures only live a day. The sun has a life cycle, I think, of billions and billions of years, and stars in general have that life cycle. But you know what's interesting is we kind of project that term life cycle onto these inanimate objects as far as like the physical sciences are concerned.
Right. So one question I have for you is, do you think something has to be biological in nature in order for it to be alive? Because not many people think of like purely gaseous things like the sun as being biological.
Right. Well, that gets into the whole other question of how do you define, like what we're trying to define as what is living.
Yeah.
And that brings us to another question, which is consciousness what makes something living? Or is it the biological shell that houses that consciousness that makes it possible? Because think about it, when somebody dies, right? Let's think about life and maybe in terms of death.
Okay.
Because that's something we all have experienced and understand to some degree. You know, when somebody dies, the body is still left over. So death is not the, you know, complete destruction of matter, although matter is never really destroyed. It just transmutes into different forms.
Right. But I wanted to clarify on that because I think you mentioned off camera, something has to have been alive at some point in order for it to die.
Right. So we think about death as almost kind of like the absence of life.
Well, but a very special kind of absence of life, right? Because if we don't attribute something as ever having been alive, we don't then start calling it dead all the time, right?
Right. Exactly. So like, for example, a dead planet like Mars, we call it a dead planet, not because we've determined through science that it did eventually used to have a magnetosphere, which probably technically made the planet alive in the terms of astrophysics and everything like that.
Yeah, or on a smaller scale, just like let's say a rock that we
Right.
don't believe was like formed by a fossil or something that was living. It's been purely inanimate, like its entire existence. Let's say we believe.
Yeah.
We don't consider that as dead necessarily if we don't believe it ever was alive before.
Right. One of our friends, can I name drop?
Yeah. Go
Okay.
ahead.
Sharina had mentioned that life is the ability to create other life. And back to the thought experiment on the sun, can a sun reproduce? I mean, it eventually will supernova or it will turn into a black hole. And normally when suns and stars supernova, they can reform into other stars. Mm-hmm. So, that's, I guess, kind of like like how a phoenix in mythology would reproduce, burns up and then rises from the ashes, so to speak. But there is also the possibility of dying and almost never returning, which is kind of like what a black hole is. It's all of the matter, but without the energy. Mm-hmm. It's all of the matter without it's all of the body, but without the mind. Interesting, right?
Yeah. So do you think mind is like a pure form of energy in some sense, or what are you attributing to mind in that?
I guess I'm kind of conflating like an Eastern view of what the mind would be with a Western idea of what the soul would be.
Okay.
Because I see those two as being very commensurate, symbologically, I guess you could say, from a symbology point of view. But I think that you'd have to ask the question, what is the mind? If you're going to, like, you have to ask why to all of these things.
Okay.
Like, okay, I'm living, you're living. The food that we eat, it's living. The food that it eats is living. And that all comes from the sun. So the sun is in many ways creating the ability to have life. So the sun's alive, but what created the sun? The Big Bang. But what created the Big Bang?
Now we're getting somewhere.
So this is what a lot of like theologists question, like what is the cause of the cause of the cause? Eventually, if you trace that all the way back, eventually you're left with this notion that what caused the Big Bang? Was it mere chance or was it will? Mm-hmm. Or was it intent?
Well, yeah, we talked about this a little bit when we mentioned the concept of will and freedom. And if you, like, humans are obviously bad at looking at the totality of the causes behind something, because at least in some small part, it does go back to essentially the beginning of existence in some way that all led up to this moment. and we can't really account for all of that. So I think, we've mentioned already that like freedom and will are concepts that we sort of reduce down from that overwhelming amount of causes to just the ones that we are taking into account.
Right. We simplify the problem to what's relevant to us.
Right.
So
what is relevant to us in this situation here?
Well, I mean, in figuring out what is living, I mean, it depends. That opens up a whole nother can of worms, because if you treat, let's go into two schools of thought. Let's say that, in a traditional biological sense, we treat all of those, everything that fits under that umbrella as being living. So like plants, but insects, mammals, etc. And you compare that to somebody who treats all of reality as if it's part of one living entity.
Okay.
And you look at maybe how those lifestyles play out. Would it be fair to say that the person who considers all of matter and all of reality to be living to some extent has more gratitude for what's around them than somebody who considers what's around them to be inanimate?
I don't know if I would use the word gratitude, but they're definitely, they have a more holistic picture of the situation, I think.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that is going to be a net, what's the benefit, I guess, from that you're trying to pull out here?
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is evolutionarily, we were used to being around, like our environments were basically surrounded by other living entities in the biological sense, like trees. We were closer to other animals. We were more in touch with the elements. Like now in a modern society, we live in apartments and houses, and we work 9 to 5 indoors in a very controlled environment. And we're not necessarily encountering so much of like even the sun, the wind, other creatures so much, unless you have a house pet.
Or even the stars, thanks to light pollution.
By the way, I'm so looking forward to going camping and seeing the stars.
Yes, sir.
A week from now. That'll be fun.
All right. So I guess where do we go from here? Are we satisfied what we've discussed in terms of what it means to be alive, or are there aspects we have left out?
Well, I think we've left out a lot. I think we've left out more than we've included, but it might give a little bit of tools for someone to work with who's trying to figure out what the meaning of life is.
Sure.
Because we had previously talked around a bonfire the other night, what is free will? And we simplified the equation. Well, what is will to begin with?
Right.
And that's a whole nother can of worms. And it's complicated to just talk about one word and one concept. When you start talking about two words combined, like free will or meaning of life, you have to talk about the meaning of meaning, the meaning of, and the meaning of life.
Yeah, especially when they're concepts that are integrally, or that are used across so much of our thought process. Right.
They're almost interdependent and interconnected.
Right.
It gets confusing. The wires get crossed. But I don't know. I mean, one of the things I would like to talk about is it possible for like an AI to be alive?
Yeah, I mean, that was part of what I was getting at when I was asking if it has to be biological in nature in order to be living or alive.
Well, I think that I don't know how you would test this, but if you're under the assumption that everything is of one mind, then everything, including AI and non-AI entities, would be alive. So,
yeah, but then my question there is, once you start encompassing so much in life, where do you start drawing the boundaries of, do you have distinct entities and persons and minds and things like that within that system? It's kind of like, where do you start drawing those boundaries between the things that are part of the same and that are different, or that are like separated out?
Right, because if you don't have that filtering mechanism, life can get pretty difficult.
Yeah, it's like I think you'd mentioned the notion of that potentially being like a compartmentalized view. And I think most people, especially in modern society, have a very highly compartmentalized look at the discrete entities that make up life, and not as much of a interdependent view of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. They have a much more compartment, for sure. I think we could go a couple different ways with this from here on out.
Yeah.
But maybe an ending question would be, is the idea of God relevant to this conversation? Is God living? Whatever God is.
Yeah, I don't remember how much you've said on camera versus off camera, but the notion of, is it the soul or the spirit that provides that animating energy or force, whatever it is, that gives life to things? And can that spirit or soul or things, does that have to be within biological entities, or could it exist in other places like AI, things like that?
Right. Well, I'll end with it. Maybe we should end here, but
yeah, I think we're at a good point for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we just an ending thought, like a radio. Chen, you and I have a radio, and we're talking over a long distance, right?
Sure.
If we're not tuned to the same frequency, you won't hear my voice, and I won't hear yours.
Right.
But that tool acts as a way of transferring energy and information. And without that information, it's like hard to know. You're outside of my perceptive sphere. I'm outside of your perceptive sphere. Even though we both have the walkie-talkie, we know we're trying to talk to each other.
Right.
That we're not. So it's a question of, is what's living even subjective to just what you perceive? Because how can you possibly perceive all that which is living, all 7 billion people, all trillions of species on the planet at the same time? Mm-hmm. Can you even articulate in your mind every living thing? And
right. I mean, that reminds me of what we were just talking about, like sort of like the compartmentalization, like, because you think of your body as like one thing, one entity, but really when you think of like all the gut bacteria and other microorganisms that exist within you, is that all actually part of one organism, or are there all these other like smaller entities that are their own life within you? Right.
Right. Well, in biology, cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up organ systems, and organ systems make up organisms. Mm-hmm. But then it goes beyond that. Organisms make up communities, communities and environment make up ecological systems, and then all of those combined make up a biosphere. I mean, there's a couple other subdivisions in there.
Right.
So but if you keep on going smaller, I mean, all the atoms that make up your cells and make them allow to live, maybe those are alive in some sense.
Interesting. I think we'll have to leave it there.
I think we will. Later, Olympians.
Later.